This is the story of America's unsinkable concrete battleship. Named Fort Drum, or to those who lived inside her, the USS Drum, it's a one-of-a-kind mega-project that became a secret underground city for US troops during the Second World War. But the Japanese were able to exploit its one weakness, forcing the Americans to launch the most daring and overall insane raid ever caught on camera in an attempt at winning it back. Because it's a 350-foot-long, ultra-fortified monolith that took 5 years to build, the likes of which has never been seen before or since. It was deemed to be completely impregnable and unsinkable due to the 30-foot thick walls of steel reinforced concrete. But it's not just coincidentally the shape of a ship, it really has multiple lower decks for the crew of over 200 people to live in, with power generators, kitchens and volleyball courts. The first time I got in there was at night and you could hear the diesel motors, wrote Jack Cole, an artilleryman from Indiana, at the time just 20 years old. You would swear you were on a ship. Everything was designed like a ship. At that point, he doesn't know what gruesome and nail-biting scenes are about to take place inside his new home, or if he'll survive his torturous years in a Japanese POW camp. Because really, Fort Drum was designed to solve a much simpler problem, one that the US kind of created for themselves. When Theodore Roosevelt was president in 1905, he convened the Board of Fortifications, tasked with modernizing the coastal defenses of newly acquired territories. For example, the Philippines, which had recently become an American colony after they defeated the Spanish there. The US Navy was surprised at how easily they had conquered the poorly defended capital through Manila Bay, and as the new colonial power there, wanted to avoid falling to the same vulnerability. They had skirted around a few small Spanish guns on a tiny rocky islet in the mouth of the bay, and they approved a spend of over $2 million, around $80 million in today's money, on fortifying it for their own uses. Beginning in 1909, Army engineers spent 5 years levelling the island and pouring thick layers of concrete to create their dream unsinkable battleship, unable to know that it would have one big problem. It was seen as the American Gibraltar, an unparalleled naval defence system, the only one of its kind on Earth, with 4 rotating 14-inch guns, each firing rounds that weigh the same as a small car today, and many other huge armaments, with subterranean tunnels and living quarters and fuel depots and munition stores, all protected by a concrete roof roughly as thick as a 2-story house is tall. The US built a few other more standard coastal defences elsewhere in the Philippines, but Fort Drum was completely unique, not just as the only unsinkable, unmovable battleship design, but also in having its turrets protected by 16-inch steel shields, leaving no vulnerability for enemy shells to get in, something that would soon come back to bite them. Jack Cole's regiment, the 59th Coastal Artillery, spent the build-up to the Second World War inside what they called USS Drum, or, on account of its supposed impregnability, the USS No-Go, describing its features with nautical terms like bow, stern and galley, and joking that the navigation officer on this thing has the easiest job in the entire Navy. They complained only of the stifling heat and humidity on the lower levels. In response, Lieutenant Colonel Lewis S. Kirkpatrick, born in Oklahoma City and known affectionately to his men as Buffalo, allows them to construct bunk beds above deck so they can sleep with the sea breeze over them. But that was a peacetime solution, and it all had to be folded down on the 7th of December 1941, after Japan's surprise attack on the United States. Hoping to cripple the West's ability to stop their imperial expansion, Japan hit not just Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, but British and American harbors and airfields across Southeast Asia at the same time, including the nearby US airbase at Clark Field near Manila. Japan's mission is clearly to loot oil from the Dutch colonies in Indonesia, and America's presence in the Philippines stands right in their way. They attempt to break the US with a month-long air raid campaign, a baptism of fire which USS Drum survives almost unscathed. Around 50,000 Japanese troops are then landed in the Philippines, and already by the 2nd of January they've taken Manila. But the rest of the islands aren't so easy. During the following months-long siege, less strongly built US positions are broken one by one, but despite enduring thousands of direct hits, not a single US soldier inside Fort Drum is killed, and only 5 get wounded. Fort Drum continuously firing back is a massive morale problem for the Japanese, who have already reported months ago to their domestic newspapers that it fell in the initial raid. But with Japanese troops advancing all over the Philippines, it can't hold out forever. On the night of the 5th of May 1942, the Japanese launch a final amphibious assault on a nearby larger US fort. And even in the darkness and the low fog, the men of Fort Drum heroically fire over 100 of their 3/4-ton shells to defend their colleagues, sinking multiple Japanese vessels and massively slowing them down. But the Japanese eventually do take all of America's other coastal defences, and it's then that the pathway into horror truly begins for the men left in the USS Drum. Having seen off a 5-month siege like water off a duck's back, it now succumbs only to its own isolation. With no hope of rescue, relief or resupply, and knowing it'll fall into enemy hands anyway if it's properly stormed, Kirkpatrick gives the order at 11:40 AM that they have 20 minutes to disable and surrender the fort. The men rush around throwing all usable equipment overboard, flooding the ammunition stores with seawater, and firing the huge guns one last time after the barrels have been spiked with sandbags in an attempt to break them. 240 men are taken to a Japanese POW camp for years of hard labour, beatings, disease and starvation. One of Fort Drum's shells had killed the brother of the camp's head officer, and in retribution the men face particularly harsh treatment. Jack Cole sees his commander, Buffalo Kirkpatrick, die there from pneumonia in 1943, and wonders if he might be next. Meanwhile, the US also has a massive new problem on its hands: Japan's unsinkable concrete battleship, and their very risky plan to take it back. The heroic last stand of the USS Drum and how it survived everything Japan threw at it immediately goes down in Pacific theatre folklore, which would be great news, other than the fact that the US now needs to liberate the Philippines from Japanese tyranny. American victories on other Pacific islands are already incredibly brutal and come at an immense human cost, even in locations where the fanatical never surrender Japanese only have makeshift bamboo defences. And now they'll have to find a way to take their own top engineers crowning glory. Even if Japan hasn't repaired all the guns, it's still an impregnable underground city. US forces under General MacArthur spend the early months of 1945 retaking the Philippines in general, and even Manila Bay itself. But with Fort Drum's turrets so well defended against their shells, it survives their massive bombardment and again becomes the very last thing standing. It's staffed by around 70 Japanese sailors, many of whom have just survived the sinking of the mega battleship Musashi and must have been grateful to be redeployed to something unsinkable. But they could never anticipate the daring and overall insane raid that the US was planning in an attempt to take it back. On the 13th of April 1945, with a film camera extraordinarily rolling, American troops approach Fort Drum in a specially modified landing craft, their hearts racing. From other vantage points, snipers watch over the action, ready to step in if any of the Japanese try to come out and interfere with their plans. The ship moves alongside and extends a custom-built wooden bridging arm, allowing troops from the 151st Infantry to run onto the roof of Fort Drum and confine the Japanese garrison to the lower decks. Combat engineers then cross the bridge too, still uncertain if they'll end up in a skirmish up there, or how good the snipers' aim is if they do, and they methodically seal all but one of the fort's ventilation shafts. Through the remaining vent, they pump over 3,000 gallons of fuel into the subterranean decks. They lower in 250 kilos of TNT, lay a fuse, and evacuate back to their landing craft. The explosion is apocalyptic. A 1-ton steel hatch flies 300 feet in the air, and the fire burns for 5 days before US troops can safely enter and inspect the blackened mess of ash. It was part pirate raid on an enemy ship, Part medieval battle with knights in armour thundering across the drawbridge into an enemy castle, wrote Sergeant Thomas J. Hooper. We found all 68 bodies inside. It was a successful operation in every way but one. The souvenir hunting wasn't very good. But the most insane fact of all is that even after all that violence, even after now 80 years has passed since those battles and since Filipino independence, since the fort being abandoned and all that time for Mother Nature and illegal scrap metal salvagers to take their toll, Fort Drum is still standing. It really is unsinkable and remains an aid to marine navigation to this day. But of the over 240 men taken prisoner from the forts, less than 30 survived their time eating maggoty rice in Japanese POW camps and made it back to the US. But among them was artilleryman Jack Cole, who lived out his days as a hairdresser in California, later recalling, "I guessed my time wasn't up. I always say, I'll live till I die."